only do that to make the Vice Chair jump. Welcome to this evening's Planning South Committee, the last of 2024. I am Councillor Ellis Brown and I shall be chairing this evening's committee meeting. I shall be supported by the Vice Chair, who I've just scared out of her skin, Councillor Lambert and the professional officers. Thank you for attending this evening. May I remind members of the public, this is not a public meeting, but a meeting in which the public are present. Therefore, except for those invited, it's not a forum for the public to ask questions or challenge the points raised by the members during the reasoned debate. If you have requested to speak, when asked to do so, please keep to your allotted time. And I think on one of the applications tonight, which is DC 240749 and the DC 240887, because we're discussing those jointly, you will have had extended time to speak. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so should you hear the alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exits, which are located just over there, on my left and behind me, and meet in the centre of Horsham by the bandstand. May I also remind council members and members of the public to please switch off your mobile phone or switch it to silent. You will see me using mine, that is to time people when they are speaking. And remember to turn your microphones on before speaking and turn them off after you've finished speaking. Everyone here this evening should be mindful that it is being live streamed and we should be conscious of our behaviour in the committee meeting this evening. Before we proceed, please could the officers introduce themselves, starting with the officers on my right.
Tamara Dale, Principal Planning Officer.
Nick Pettifer, Senior Planning Officer.
Adrian Smith, Major Applications Team Leader.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Claire Brown, Principal Planning Solicitor.
Melissa Stallard, Democratic Services Officer.
Judy Carboni, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. And members, when you are voting, please can you raise your hands so we can see them very clearly, so that we can capture an accurate vote on what we're discussing. Thank you very much. Moving on to the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Emma Baird, Councillor Philip Serkis, Councillor Alan Manton, Councillor Roger Knoll and Councillor Josh Potts.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, minutes to prove as correct the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of November. Can I take these as agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Any declaration of members' interests? No? Okay, thank you. I do have an announcement to make. At the previous meeting of the Planning South Committee, it was agreed that tonight's meeting and that of the 21st of January will start at 8:30.
6:30.
6:30, sorry.
18:30.
18.
Yeah, sorry. 18:30. Apologies. However, my notes have now gone. Sorry, it's a disaster, isn't it? Thank you. It can only get better, as someone once saying. Okay. Should the local planning inquiry not be reinstated, it's proposed that the Planning South meeting on the 21st of January be held at the usual start time of 17:30. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Clark, all those in favour? Thank you, that looks like it's unanimous. Okay, should it be necessary, we can move the start date on the 21st of January to 17:30. Thank you very much. Item number 5, we move to appeals. Any comments on the appeals at all? No? Okay. Agenda item number 6 has been withdrawn due to unresolved ecology issues. Items 7 and 8 which is Hilland House, New Road, Billingshurst, will be discussed jointly but voted on separately. They are two separate applications, and as such we're not considering an aggregate of 240 dwellings, as we are dealing with these jointly. Speakers will have twice as long as the usual time. So normally you would have had 2 minutes. For the members of the public, you've now got up to 4 minutes, but it would appreciate if you kept under the 4 minutes. And those councillors will have 5 minutes, will have 10 minutes instead, but I can't imagine that you will use all the 10 minutes. So therefore, could I ask the officers to present these applications to the committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got to advise members of an error on the front pages of both of items 7 and 8, in that the applications are made in outline, and so the recommendation is to approve outline consent for each of those items, not full consent as it says on the reports. Members' attention is also drawn to the addendum which has been prepared following the publication of the revised NPPF. And just a further amendment to the drawing number in condition 32, which would just need to read drawing 23163/32 as received on the 21st of 10th 2024. So that again applies to both items 7 and 8. Since the reports have both been finalised, there's been two extra letters of support citing the need for local affordable housing in the area. And they were received on the first item, item 7, and one letter of objection has been received on the second item, so that's item 8. And that objection is raised on highway safety, the carriageway being less than 5.5 metres, too narrow for normal sized vehicles to pass, requiring vehicles to slow down to pass each other, increased risk to persons walking along the pavement from vehicles, HGVs passing close, scratches to cars from having to pass close to the hedgerow, and more regular hedge trimming needed than the standard once per year. So that's just an update since the publication of the reports. So slide 1 sets out the application site for both items 7 and 8. It's the same site and it lies outside of but adjoining the built-up area of Billingshurst. The site comprises 2 open field parcels, a woodland block and part of the residential curtilage of Hilland House. There's a public right-of-way, number 1942, which runs through and then alongside the site's western boundary, where the Billingshurst Trade Park lies, within the expanded built-up area to the west. These slides are some photos of the site itself. These ones show the northern parcel. You can see a slight rise in topography across the site and the existing tree lines. This slide shows the site from New Road, the southern parcel of the site. You can see the development within the built-up area of Billingshurst in the central slide on the left-hand side. So that's looking south. And then again, you can see the sloping site levels across the site there. This slide shows the site from the southern side, Hilland Road, or the A272 as it's also known, and the arrows just point out the application site, the woodland block within the application site, the approximate line of the public right-of-way, and then the Hilland or the Billingshurst Trade Park off to one side as well. The site plan for both items 7 and 8 is the same. You can see here the red line outlines the application site and takes in all the application land necessary to deliver the proposed outline scheme, including the highways, works and the new access or the new pavement alongside New Road. The first layout is the indicative layout for item 7, which is an outline application for up to 125 dwellings, of which 54 would be affordable, which equates to around 43%, and takes in a blended ratio of the increased affordable housing rate that is being proposed in the draft local plan. The existing woodland block is to be managed and retained as part of the site's public open space, alongside a community orchard and children's play space. The indicative layout will be subject to subsequent approval under reserved matters applications, as only access is being considered under the current outline applications for both 7 and 8, but this one's relating to item 7. Vehicular access to the application site will be provided off New Road along the north, and sustainable pedestrian and cycle links are to be created by way of a new permissive path from the southeast corner of the site, linking through to public right-of-way 1941 and Wooddale Lane, which lies near the Duckmore site. There would be some upgrading of the public right-of-way to the south of the site, which is public right-of-way 1942, which runs through the application site, and it would enable cycle use and create an onward cycle link through the development. Won't touch it. Would create an onward cycle link through the development site up to New Road to the north, and would connect with surfaced bonded gravel and lit and unlit pedestrian and cycle paths to the south within the east of Billingshurst development site. The proposal also includes for the formation of a new 1.5 metre wide pavement along the southern side of New Road, achieved by way of some carriageway augmentation to a width of 4.8 metres and some hedgerow management along the southern side, although the hedgerow is to be retained along the length. The new footpath will provide access between the site and the bus stops along Stain Street, as well as village amenities such as a supermarket, employment, etc. There are existing lit footpaths through into the village and its amenities. So, I've just spotted an error on the slide, I apologise. This is item 8 for outline consent for up to 117 dwellings on the same site. And this seeks an alternative outline consent for principally the same proposal, but with a reduced development quantum. The affordable contribution on this site will provide for 49 affordable dwellings, also at an increased blended rate of 43%. The key differences between the two items being considered, aside from the development quantum, comes by way of an increased landscape buffer along the southern side of the site, which amounts to some 35 metres depth with this current scheme, which is item 8. And it's about 10 metres on the alternative proposal of item 7. The sustainable links and access to the site are the same for both applications, and vehicular access will be taken off New Road in the same location. Just some slides showing the land use parameters of both items 7 and 8, so you can see a direct comparison. And I've just highlighted the difference there with a little cloud on the bottom image showing the principal area of difference. We've got some height parameters again of both items 7 and 8. And the principal difference is in this southern area, where there would be an increased provision of 1 and 1.5 story dwellings within the pink block. And actually, I think I've mixed those up. Yes, sorry, just for clarification, I've mixed those ones up. Don't know how that happened. So the bottom item, the bottom drawing is the item 7, so that's for the up to 125 dwellings. I do apologise. So vehicular access off New Road into the site is demonstrated with these drawings, and the ability to achieve the required visibility displays. This slide sets out the alignment of the new footpath along the southern side of New Road and the hedgerow, and the images demonstrate how that is to be achieved within the carriageway. You can see the red dotted lines there show the proposed augmentation. This slide just picks up on the hedgerow. At the moment that is quite wide and quite deep, but actually we've, as officers, have been to site and we've had a look within the line of the hedgerow to establish where the line of the original hedgerow is. And as you can see from these slides, there is verge capacity. It's just that it's been allowed to grow outwards over the last few years. Some sustainable cycle links from the site are just shown on these two images, with the top left showing the permissive path out of the southeastern side of the development site, and then the bottom right image shows the potential cycle links through the Hilland Trade Park and into the roundabout at Hilland Road and Stane Street. Just some visualisations of the increased boundary vegetation along the side to mitigate the landscape impact, and proposed highways works to the Stane Street New Road roundabout. So if I go back to the site plan, officers do recognise that the site lies outside of the defined built-up area boundary and has not been allocated for development and therefore does not accord with the strategic planning policies. But officers also acknowledge the identified substantial adverse harm at the local level and the detrimental effect on the amenity of the users of the public right-of-way, which has been raised by the Council's landscape officer. However, in acknowledging the policy conflict and that the Council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply position, the proposal has been considered against a tilted balance set out under paragraph 11D, lim 2 of the NPPF. Specifically, to grant permission unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the NPPF as a whole, with the addition of the following paragraph: having particular regard to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places and providing affordable homes individually or in combination. And that latter part reflects the revisions to the NPPF. Therefore, there are a number of material benefits resulting from the proposed developments being set out under items 7 and 8, which are set out in the Officers' Committee report, including the blended provision of a ratio of 43% of affordable housing, which is at a higher rate than the currently applied 35% affordable housing rate, currently sought under the Horsham District Planning Framework. The improved sustainable access to public transport network, bus stops by way of a new footpath along New Road, and other pedestrian and cycle routes to be created and upgrading from the south of the site to connect to an existing network of pedestrian and cycle routes. The site being contiguous with the built-up edge of Billingshurst along part of the western boundary and contained within a defensible boundary, thus not appearing to encroach into the wider open countryside beyond. Given the location of the site at the northern edge of the village, there would be no resulting development creep beyond the site and no settlement coalescence. The proposal also accords with the FAD criteria, which is facilitating appropriate development. The ability to provide on-site biodiversity net gain, enabling safe access to the site in accordance with other development plan policies, as well as the ability to secure on-site water neutral solution by way of a borehole to ensure that potable water can be delivered to the site and does not create an additional impact on the habitat site. And therefore, both applications are recommended for approval for outline consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the first speaker, Deepak, please. Reminder, your comments are related to both applications and therefore you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Do you mind if I just put my stopwatch on? Thank you. Let me start off with the context of the development. So, New Road is not a quiet rural road. It's a key road that now serves a Billingshurst retail park. You saw that on the first picture. That park holds a Lidl, a Morrison's, a Shell, a Screwfix, a tool station, and there's currently proposals to put a Range in there, as well as a Marks and Spencer's. So what we are seeing is an ever increase of traffic volumes going down New Road to reach that retail park. New Road is bendy throughout, except for very few straight sections. One straight section is between the development and the retail park. It's straight and it's downhill. Hence, vehicles actually accelerate down that road and even overtake on that stretch because there's very few places to overtake. The speed limit across New Road is 60 miles an hour. This stretch of road is where the applicant wants to narrow and create a footpath. I will now cover 7 breaches of policy in relation to this stretch of road. The inclusive mobility policy is referenced 6 times in the committee report, so it's quite relevant. There are 4 major breaches to that policy. Firstly, the policy states a footpath must be level, and if it can't be level, then the maximum gradient allowed is 1 in 20. The proposed gradient of the footpath at this development is on average 1 in 19, but more importantly, there's a section of 90 metres, which is 1 in 8. 1 in 8, so that's a breach straight off. Second policy breach is that if you have a slope, you should have landing zones, horizontal areas where wheelchair users can stop, rest before they carry on. There are no landing zones proposed. Third breach, if it's a steep slope and 1 in 8 is steep, you need to have guardrails along the footpath. There are no guardrails proposed. Fourth breach is that the footpath should have an edge that's 15 centimetres high, again for safety reasons between the footpath and the road. No edging is proposed. These combined 4 breaches result in significant danger and difficulty for wheelchair users and is totally against the inclusive mobility policy that is referenced multiple times in this document. Let me talk about 3 other breaches. The government issued what they call the rural road criteria. Or all-purpose trunk roads is equally suitable for estate roads or busy urban streets. That's what highways have used. They've used the current criteria of those to define what's required for access on New Road and the changes. The committee report confirms New Road is a rural road. Page 2 states that. There are 3 major breaches. Firstly, that criteria says a minimum of 5.5 metres is a width allowed on a rural road to allow 2 cars to pass by safely at low speed. That is not the case here, because the developers want to reduce the width of that road to 4.8. Secondly, the criteria states there should be 1.5 metre grass verges on both sides of the road. The proposal is actually going to remove the grass verge from the northern side of the road to enable a footpath to be fitted. Thirdly, and this is really important, the policy says there should be a grass verge between the road and the footpath of 0.5 metres. There is 0 grass verge there. Now, the combined effect of those 3 breaches is quite significant. 80% of the residents of New Road are equestrian users. They have lorries and trailers. There are vast numbers of vans go up and down that road because there's a gypsy, partly because there's a gypsy, 2 gypsy sites at the top that all have vans. They're all wider than 2.4 metres wide. There's no passing areas, hence vehicles will not be able to pass each other. They will mount the pavement to pass. So there are 7 breaches of policy within what has been proposed here. And I suggest you guys defer this application until those policy breaches have been worked through.
Sorry, can I ask you to bring your comments to conclusion, please?
And I'd say, last point is, Nick has done an excellent job, but she's been let down by the highways team, who have not basically applied the right policies and are in breach. throughout this whole development on that stretch of road. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil Payne, please. You have 4 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Neil Payne. I've been a resident of New Road for over 10 years. I'm not an expert in these areas, so these opinions are given in good faith. I'd like to speak on 3 issues. Firstly, the aquifer and boreholes. Secondly, the treatment plant. And finally, the planning conditions related to water neutrality. On the boreholes, a couple of responses from the public draw attention to the risk statement in the borehole prognosis report submitted by the applicant. I quote, "Due to limited storage and recharge to productive sandstone and limestone horizons within the wheel clay formation, yields may decline over time. The key risk associated with a borehole which targets the wheel clay is that the desired yield may not be achieved or sustained over long periods of time." I'm not sure how much clearer those statements could be, and yet the application seeks to tie the fortunes of 125 homeowners to exactly such boreholes. The tests that demonstrate the ability of the boreholes to supply the required yield at the current point in time do not address the ability of the aquifer to sustain the yield in the long term. If this is stated as a risk, I'd expect a comprehensive expert opinion on the projected longevity of the aquifer. I couldn't find one. Returning to the report, it states that the hydrogeology of the wheel clay formation is complex and not well understood due to its heterogeneity. Complex and not well understood. Perhaps that's the reason we don't have any expert comment on the longevity of the aquifer. Nor is there any attempt to cite the successful long-term drawdowns in similar projects of 4 local wells identified through abandon, and where is the evidence of other boreholes in wheel clay formations supplying hundreds of people over decades. Moving on to the plant required to treat the water, it is a complex system, and environmental health and licensing asked whether a system that requires this level of monitoring and maintenance is appropriate for a large-scale residential development. The technical issues have been documented, but where does the long-term ownership and responsibility lie? There is no commitment from the developer to fund the operation or underwrite any long-term capital expenditure needed. The costs and risks end up with the home buyers. You may be well aware of the enormous burden on homeowners, particularly in social housing, caused by centralised heating and hot water systems. This shouldn't be replicated. Finally, I'd like to move on to the planning conditions that are sought with regards to water neutrality. I don't see how you can use planning conditions to ensure this development remains water neutral in perpetuity. Section 45 of the Water Industry Act 1991 imposes a duty on a water company to make a connection to the water main for a domestic supply. I would suggest, therefore, that any condition, such as condition 36, which seeks to deny the ability to connect to the mains water supply, is questionable. Even if the Water Industry Act is moot, are you going to sanction 125 homeowners in years to come because through absolutely no fault of their own, the development doesn't meet water neutrality? Would it have been possible to tie success of water neutrality to the developer financially through a Section 106 framework? In summary, no evidence of the borehole's long-term viability. This is a complex and expensive piece of infrastructure to treat the water, and this will become a liability for homeowners. And planning conditions won't help in 20 years' time if the development can no longer be water neutral. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sam Bateman, and you have up to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Just working. Okay, so I want to talk about connectivity and water neutrality and public safety, and also Billingshurst resource. But first of all, I just want to make sure that everybody has fully heard and read the comments from the council's own landscape architect, who write in the report, the proposed development will result in substantial landscape harm at a local level and a detrimental effect on the amenity of the public right-of-way network. It does not relate well to the settlement edge. This development will further erode the rural character of the northern edge of Billingshurst. I just want to make sure you've actually engaged with those words. I want to start off talking about water neutrality though. The developer's proposal for these homes is for them not to be connected to mains water. Drinking water for those properties is going to come from rainwater collected in a big hole. And then an estate management agency are going to be entrusted with the responsibility of making sure that the residents are not poisoned. An estate management company, not a competent water authority, an estate management authority. The ones that can't even get light bulbs changed on a street light. I know theoretically that they might do a good job, theoretically, but we've seen what happens in that in principle. And I just want to make sure the developers on record know what they're proposing for the residents of that site. I now want to talk to you about the connectivity of the site. Deepak's talked about the intention for a footpath. It's substantial, it's substandard. It is the absolute minimum width for a footpath in a good place, and it's not in a good place. It's the absolute minimum. It's also unlit because there's concerns about the bat population in that area. It's an unlit footpath. It then connects onto a major 60-mile-an-hour road. The children getting to the schools, getting to the services of the community, the doctors, the shops, the community centre. They then have to cross a bypass, the A29 bypass. West Sussex haven't even requested for there to be a crossing. So you have children there to get to, from that site to the rest of Billingshurst, crossing a major road without a crossing point. And that's the best footpath connection. There are some public right-of-ways upgrades, which basically means that there will be some gravel pathways going through a field of cows that's not owned by the developer. They will then be able to get to the bypass and cross the bypass at that point, the point at which it drops from 50 to 30. But let's face it, which cars actually do that when they're about to try and get over onto the 60-mile-an-hour stretch? And again, they've then got to cross through a field, unlit. This is not well connected to Billingshurst. We've got no proper connectivity from this site. The bramble hedging that they're talking about maintaining, that is not hedging that is owned by the developer. It comes under the ownership of the trade park. It's not owned by any council. It's a developer's piece of land. So management of that hedgerow is on a wing and a prayer. So I do not think that this particular proposal is a good one. And I understand the tilted balance, but even so, it falls way below what is right and what is suitable for an area which is already being massively over-expanded. And that comes onto the resource. Billingshurst is looked at continually to pick up the Horsham district's housing shortage. It's assumed that we have infinite resource. But when you've already got Duckmore coming through on a preemptive application, you've already got 30% increase in housing already, and you've already got Billingshurst East in the local plan, at what point are we going to accept that the resources have been extracted to capacity and there's nothing left? At what point is that going to be accepted? Because at the moment, what we're having here is aggressive application after aggressive application, seeking to take advantage of the fact that the last council didn't have the bravery to actually agree a local plan. That's where we're at. We had cowards as a council who didn't agree a local plan, and that is why Billingshurst is suffering. That is why we are being hung out to dry at the moment, because you didn't get a local plan through. So all these preemptive applications are coming through because the developers know
Excuse
we
me,
are
sorry,
wrong.
excuse excuse me, your comments must be material to the decision we're making, not comments about the previous
Yeah.
council. Sorry.
So I'm just, I just feel very much that we have a local plan. It is not in the local plan. This application is not in our intended plan. It's outside it. And the only reason it's here is because there is a gap at the moment that people are seeking to extract. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Graham Beck, please. You have 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members. We've been involved with this project for some years now, promoting the site through the local plan as well as preparing 2 applications before you today. A huge amount of work has been undertaken by the applicant, their consultant team, your own officers from various departments and outside agencies. From the initial public exhibition held in Bellinghurst earlier this year and arising from the pre-application inquiry with officers, changes have been made to the proposals, resulting in both applications receiving recommendations for approval. It's common knowledge and generally accepted that there is a growing requirement for housing, especially the need for affordable housing. The District Council recognises the difficulties of delivery, publishing the facilitating appropriate development document, which both these applications comply with. Planning decisions always require a balance, but in these cases, both the adopted local plan policies and emerging policies have been taken into account to meet the Council's future expectations and aspirations. There are no objections from the Council's housing officer, and if approved, 23% of the local need in Billingshurst would be immediately satisfied. Both applications have been landscape-led from the outset. My colleague Mr. Davis will explain further. This is important, but equally important are all the other policy considerations. One of the key reasons for the difficulties experienced delivering new housing in the district is water neutrality. But these applications demonstrate water neutrality and can be delivered without delay. There are no objections from your Environmental Health Officer, Natural England, the Environment Agency, or the Water Authority, and there are no objections from the Flood Authority. From an ecological perspective, in line with emerging policy, both applications achieve huge BNG results, far exceeding the Council's planning policy requirements, with over provision of 170% above the planning requirement. The proposal is highly sustainable, with no objections from the Highway Authority. Improvements will be made to the local public rights of way to facilitate more walking and cycling. The applications are also compliant with the Council's climate change policies. Every new dwelling will be provided with an electricity supply to charge an electric car, for example. There are no objections from the Council's arboriculturalist or ecologist. There are no objections regarding air quality, noise, contamination, waste and recycling. There are no objections from other external consultees, namely West Sussex County Council Education, Fire and Rescue, Minerals and Waste. There are some objections from the Parish Council, CPRE, and from some local residents on the topics of water neutrality, highways, location and environmental concerns, all of which have been responded to by outside agencies, resulting in robust technical reasons why the applications both comply with current standards. Equally, there are letters of support from people who need housing, which my colleague Millie Dodd will address. There is a difference of opinion about the effect these applications may have on the landscape, but the proper planning balance is addressed in the officers' reports. Change is an inevitable consequence of development, but any change will be delivered in accordance with Council policies and the updated MPPF. In our opinion, the social, economic and environmental benefits outweigh any limited harm. The delivery of affordable housing beyond current policy, the inclusion of some 11 acres of public open space, the levels of sustainability included within the application to include energy efficient homes, securing water neutrality and the enormous biodiversity
Excuse
net
me,
gained
could I ask you
together
to bring your comments to a conclusion, please?
outweigh any harm. Thank you.
Okay, Mike Davis, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. My name is Mike Davis, and I'm the landscape architect and master planner for both applications. I'm a landscape architect that specialises in master planning greenfield sites, and while I try and balance all technical considerations in that process, we very much take a landscape-led approach, which we believe results in a development that has less impact and is well integrated with its landscape, and also facilitates distinctive placemaking. Some degree of landscape harm on a greenfield site is inevitable, and the two applications before you are the final result of a long and carefully considered process of analysis, evaluation, and stakeholder engagement. On both applications, we've retained and protected the most sensitive features that positively contribute towards its character, and there are relatively minor conflicts with existing vegetation. In terms of landscape enhancement, the applications will each deliver a country park extending to just over 11 acres, and these will comprise informal natural open space, accessible woodland areas, amenity and children's play space, achieving more than double the policy requirement for open space. In addition, we will plant over 275 new trees and 300 metres of native hedges in and around the development. And the open space will include a community growing area and an orchard, even though there is no policy requirement to do so. Many sites are now struggling to achieve a 10% biodiversity net gain, and it is testimony and an endorsement of our landscape-led approach that we've been able to exceed this target sixfold. In terms of visual impact, the South Downs National Parks lies some 5 to 13 kilometres to the south and west, and views of both applications would be negligible. The key views are all localised from the northern fringes of the village, and both applications are supported by accurate photo montages to show how successfully the site would assimilate with its landscape to retain a strongly wooded and treed character with no wider impact. To help reduce visual impact, we are proposing maximum height parameters so that at least 20% of those houses in the southern field will be bungalows and no buildings will be above 2 stories. Less than 50% of the application sites are to be developed with a low density overall, but very low densities on the more sensitive southwest and south boundaries, facilitating wider gaps with generous open spaces to plant trees and hedgerows, which will in addition filter views and create a leafy environment. Buildings are also set back 10 to 15 metres from the public right-of-way to the west boundary. Pedestrian and cycle connectivity will be significantly increased in both applications with new year-round surface routes, facilitating active travel to the village to the south and southeast, the employment and trade parks to the west, as well as connecting with a new network of circular routes within the site. I commend officers for their careful consideration of the complex issues in these applications and arriving at their recommendation to approve both schemes. Thank you, and I will hand over to Millie.
Thank you very much. Okay, Millie Dodd, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Millie Dodd and I am a Senior Manager at Just Build Homes. We work with Northgate Properties during the determination period of these planning applications to explore supportive voices for new homes at the Hilland House site. 11 individual local letters of support were submitted for this site, each with their own personal reasons why they want to see this development go ahead. Access to safe and secure housing is the foundation of all of our lives. When new homes are approved, local people can move out of temporary accommodation and start their lives in the affordable housing provided by developments like this. Prospective renters can take the first step to independence and move out of their family homes. And first-time buyers can access suitable housing so they can start their journey onto the property ladder. This development will provide up to 125 homes for local people affected by the housing crisis. 125 opportunities that would have benefited people like Sam Phillips, a 28-year-old local renter who's having to move out of Horsham to find housing for his young family. He is supporting this scheme. Homes like these would have enabled my young family to stay in the area. I am soon relocating and moving out of Horsham because of the lack of housing in the area has caused higher house prices. It's too late for my family, but for many others it could make the difference of being able to stay in the community. Joining us today at this committee meeting is Sophie, a 22-year-old Horsham resident. Her life was transformed by being able to access new housing in the Kilnwood Vale development approved by this council. For 8 months, Sophie was forced to live in temporary accommodation in one room with her baby daughter after becoming homeless through no fault of her own. That's over 243 days waking up without a home to call your own. Since being housed in Kilnwood Vale, she has a secure job with future prospects at a local nursery in Horsham, who are providing a level 3 workplace qualification alongside her employment. This has only been possible because the foundation of a secure home has given her the opportunity to remain living near her family, friends and local community, who have helped her with childcare, enabling her to work and study. This development will provide well over the required percentage of affordable homes, up to 54. That's at least 54 opportunities for people like Sophie to start their lives in safe and secure housing. Support has also come from the older generation, those over 55 who are concerned about their children and grandchildren being able to find housing in the local area and the effect that this has on younger people. Many people in my generation have to remain living at home into their 30s and are faced with the decision of either sacrificing their independence to eventually afford housing or moving away from their established community to find somewhere to call home. Hazel Bonnan, a 68-year-old homeowner, said, "I'm in favour of these homes as I believe it's important for young people to have somewhere to live. It's a horrid situation for young people, both of mine are at home. If you've got a partner, then you're probably able to move, but if you haven't, there's no way you can move by yourself. The scales need tipping somehow in their favour." And Samir, a 69-year-old private renter, said, "I support these houses, hopefully to help my children. It's much more difficult to buy a house, find a house and rent, everything now. The prices are so high." And Kelly Milbank, a local homeowner who lives a 5-minute drive away from the site, said, "I support the plans for these new homes because it allows more people to get onto the property ladder, particularly with shared ownership." Almost everyone in this room will know someone affected by the housing crisis, and there was a strong recognition of the effects of the local housing crisis amongst the supporters of this scheme. Anna, a 39-year-old local renter, said, "I back the plans because there's a lot of people who can't afford to rent and buy. We need more space to live." You as councillors have the opportunity today to help people like Sophie, Sam, Hazel, Samir, Kelly and Anna, as well as many other residents in your area affected by the housing crisis. You can help them by approving the scheme and giving local people the homes that they need. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lots to come back and respond to in terms of comments. My colleague will address the highway issues that were raised by the first speaker in due course, but I'll perhaps start by looking at water neutrality and the comments made around the reliability of the borehole in the longer term. And I'll sort of refer you to the report, pages 93, 94, that talk about water neutrality. As a starting point, the applicants are proposing efficiencies on site, which includes fixtures and fittings, but also a rainwater harvesting system. That means that it's anticipated that the site would consume some 14,731 litres per day, so bear that figure in mind. A number of borehole prognosis reports have been submitted, the latest in response to comments raised by the Environment Agency when they were consulted on this application. This latest report identifies that 2 boreholes have been sunk on the land and that they were tested in December last year, February this year and August this year for 2 to 3 days apiece. And they were tested at a maximum in February of 120 cubic metres a day. There's 120,000 litres, almost 10 times the need for the development. Others were less at 87 cubic and 59 cubic. And off the back of this, the report identifies that, particularly for the second borehole, the water levels recovered fast. So on the basis that the borehole testing has been carried out on some 3, 4, 5 times as much water as is needed on a daily basis, and that the borehole 2 in particular recovered its water fairly quickly, that there is reliability as far as officers are concerned that there is enough water in here. Now, obviously we're looking at an 80-year period and you can never really predict the future, but the best testing has been carried out. The Environment Agency have withdrawn their objection to the information that has been put in off the back of that. And so as officers, we are confident that in this situation that there is sufficient water in this part of the aquifer to serve this development. In terms of sort of other matters around management and maintenance, you'll have seen that there are a number of conditions that have been applied to the recommendation, which have been requested by both the Environment Agency and our environmental health team. And these deal with management and maintenance programmes to make sure that the water is to a safe standard. We have taken external advice on the reverse osmosis process to ensure that it is a safe and potable standard. And a reminder that it is our environmental health team who are responsible for safe water on this site through the private waters regulations. And so therefore they've taken a very exacting approach in how they have considered this application, hence why they've gone to seek external advice on the reverse osmosis process. So out of that, they are confident that suitable management maintenance can take place to ensure that the borehole does provide for a safe, potable water supply. The same goes for the rainwater systems that would be centrally managed through a management company, and you'll have seen previous applications in front of this committee that have proposed similar rainwater systems. In terms of sort of other points that have been raised in terms of landscape impact and the substantial harm identified by our landscape architects, that has been referred to in the report, and officers have balanced that off against the mitigation being proposed, particularly on the southern boundary, and also against obviously the other benefits in the planning balance. In terms of other matters around hedgerow management and maintenance on that southern side of New Road, the officers would expect that maintenance is carried out by the management company for the estate, rather than the hedge owners, who are not party to any agreement or party to this application, and not by the County Highways Authority. In terms of when that can take place, there are exemptions to allow for hedgerow cutting where that hedgerows would interfere with the public being able to use a right-of-way or footpath, or where any hedgerows or trees, etc., present a danger to such users. So in theory, that maintenance can be carried out year-round. I'll pass over to my colleague to pick up on the matters on general highways concerns.
Thank you. The proposal has been subject to lengthy discussions with the West Sussex County Council Highways Authority, including the pedestrian linkages as well as vehicular access and so forth. We are also aware that the highways officer has been out to site. Indeed, we've been out to site with him as well. But in terms of the footpath and the gradient, that has not been raised as an issue by the highways officer, and they are happy that the footpath at 1.5 metres is the minimum, and it's admittedly not the 1.8 that they would like, but it's at 1.5 metres wide. It is the minimum that they would accept alongside New Road. Just to be clear, it's pedestrian footpath, it's not a shared space for cyclists and pedestrians, it's just there to provide pedestrian connectivity. The document that is referred to, Inclusive Mobilities Guidance, tries to set out best practice. Does refer to gradients, But as I said, this proposal has been reviewed by West Sussex County Council highways officers. They have been out to site, so they are familiar with the on-site in situ context of the roadways.
Excuse me, sorry, you're not entitled to respond to the officer, okay? Thank you. Sorry, you are not allowed to respond to the officer. I will not make another comment on that. Thank you.
But I mean, perhaps best practice guidance. There's a distinction between policy and this inclusive mobility document is best practice guidance, and it sets out a sort of a common baseline. But as I said, referring back to the West Sussex Highways officer, they have been to site. They have not raised any concerns with the geometry or the provision of a footpath alongside the new road. Thank you.
I might just add, just to sort of batten down the point that my colleague has made, is this inclusive mobility and other guidance, manual for streets, etc., is guidance. And obviously it's correct that that guidance is reviewed, but each site has its own circumstances, limitations, etc. It is not policy that that guidance must be adhered to in all respects in every case. Hence why our highways authority have looked at this development, have been on site with us, we've measured the distances, separations, etc. We've looked at highway speeds because we've stood there while vehicles were passing us on the carriageway there. And the view of the highways authority and ourselves as officers is this is an acceptable arrangement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite Councillor Baynham, please. I just remind members that we are discussing both of these together, but we are voting on them separately. Thank you, Councillor Baynham.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I've listened very carefully to all that's been said so far by members of the public contributing to this debate. And the last speaker, that was Millie Dodd, spoke quite passionately about the need for housing, especially for young people and people whose circumstances are difficult at the moment. And I have to say, I fully agree with that. It's very difficult for young people and a lot of people to get on the housing ladder these days. But in Billingshurst, if you just go maybe half a kilometre to the south of this proposed site, you see the designated site for a strategic site for 650 homes, which is substantially bigger than this particular development. And those are the sorts of houses that will be supplying the need or meeting the need that we require. Now, let's look a bit more about this particular application. It's what does it have going for it? Well, it supplies more housing. It makes it easier to meet the government's housing targets, which have recently been raised in the new NPPF. But it's also right on the outskirts of the village. It's not in the built-up area. It's adjacent to the built-up area, but not to the built-up housing area. It's adjacent to a business park. So it's really quite isolated. Now, in her initial introduction, I mean, we're talking about here an outline planning consent, an outline application. And Nicola, in your introduction, you mentioned, well, it's pretty much all about access. So I'm concentrating here on the access issues. And really, they are really substandard. Now, we've heard quite a lot about the new road path and the fact that it's the roadway is going to be a 4.8 metre minimum. Well, it's going to be 4.8 metres, which is the minimum. And we've heard about that there will be a 1.5 metre pavement or I'm not sure if it's a pavement or a path, but anyway, it's to the side of the road. And that does involve taking away the existing verge on the northern side. We've also heard that there's hedgerows jutting abutting both of them. And we've seen in the photographs how they grow. Now, the landowners, we are told just now, which I've not heard before, and I haven't found reference to it in the papers, that it's going to be a management company for the estate development who will be responsible for that. But I don't see that in the papers here anyway. And if it's not in the papers, why should they bother? The landowners themselves are restricted to cutting those hedgerows just once a year in October, which means from spring to October, they're going to be way over that pathway. So it's going to be quite restricted there. And there's no really getting around that. The road isn't going to be widened to an extent that is really necessary for that. The route into Billingshurst via the A29, we talked about that, or Councillor Bateman spoke about that roundabout, and it's a very fast-moving, busy roundabout. Now, the figures that West Sussex County Council Highways Department relied upon when they were assessing the traffic volume there, they did a real-time manual count, and they came to a figure of 11,085 vehicles a day. However, there's another count that was done in 2023, then in 2022 by the Department for Transport at that location, which put the figures at 17,643, which is substantially more than that actually put forward in the paper supporting the application. And that was before the opening of the Lidl supermarket. Now, I don't know how many people go there every day, but it's going to put it much higher. So there's a basic flaw in the judgments made by West Sussex County Council here, because they're basing it on a much lower, 50% lower traffic volume than they've said there. The other part about the access is to do with the cycle come footpaths. Now we've seen. I wonder if I can have the. Oh, I've got that one up there. If you look on that south footpath, which is it's got red arrows, says upgrading of public right of way 1942. You'll see it cuts across the field there. That field is used for grazing of cattle and sheep at the moment. And therefore it's not safe as it is at the moment to have it as a standard footpath for everybody to go down there. So the solution, which has been acknowledged in the report, is that there should be a fenced pathway. Now, if you have a fenced pathway, you're cutting off on the west side that little sort of triangle of land, which makes it completely unusable for the landowner in terms of grazing, because you're not going to put a bridge over or something to go over the pathway. Now, if we look at paragraph, 688 is well one, yeah. It talks about there's currently, and I quote here, there's currently an element of doubt over the ability to secure the access improvements over the adjacent field. Why is there doubt? Because there's been no agreement between the developers and the landowner. Now, we heard from the applicants that they've been working on this for a long time. Well, if they've been working on it a long time, how come they haven't reached an agreement over this quite crucial part of the access arrangements? And those arrangements, it's proposed to hand those over to West Sussex and say, well, you can do that. And we'll have a 106 agreement just to settle that there'll be an agreement about it to access these improvements. But there's no guarantee that that can even happen. Because if the landowner says, no, I want to keep grazing my sheep and grazing my cows, they're perfectly entitled to do so. They're not being forced to do it. And even if they do, they've pretty much got, they've got the West Sussex then over a barrel, because they're going to charge as much as they can possibly get out of it. Now, I think it's incumbent on the developers to actually sort that problem out themselves. and not try and put it over to the county council. I think I've pretty well come to the end of what I really wanted to say, but I'm also concerned about the fact that we've referenced substantial local harm. In other applications that I've sat on and voted on in the past, we've heard about moderate to acceptable levels of local harm. I haven't come across this substantial local harm before. And if that's acknowledged, then for me, it makes it a difficult application to approve. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Troller, do you add any more?
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit hard to follow what Marcus said. I agree with all of the points that he's made. On the whole, I look at this application or applications, and there are some parts of it that are good. I think actually aesthetically it looks fairly nice. I like the fact there's a pond. I like the fact there's woods. I like this fact that it acknowledges active travel and actually puts in cycle paths. I think that is quite good as well. But there's too many buts that follow for me. I acknowledge that highways have signed this off, but again, I would question how it was signed off. I feel it's the bare minimum. That they're following the letter of the law, but not the spirit of it. And I have basic questions like, how do two tractors pass each other? The tractors come up and down this road. I've cycled on this road a lot. I've got my bicycle over there. I'm actually going to be cycling on it tonight after this meeting. And tractors come across each other. They're not going to be able to pass each other in this area. I also question that, okay, we take the measurement. I don't know, why is the measurement a wheelchair and a person? Why is it not two wheelchairs? Because inevitably, at some point in life, two wheelchair users are going to come in opposite directions. And I'm not quite sure with one, I remember pushing my mother with a wheelchair, and I can't quite work out what is half of 1.8 meters, but I don't think it would work. One of the wheelchair users would have to either go into the bushes or the hedge, and the other, or go onto the road. Plus it's dark, yeah, because there's no light after 4:30 in the wintertime. It's okay in the summer, probably you can get by in the summer, but not in the winter. Not a 14-year-old child coming home from school, who may or may not be looking at their telephone as they walk down, or may not be goofing around with their friends as they walk. It just seems to me half-baked, the whole thing. The travel aspect of it. Half-baked, and yeah, it passes the least amount we can get away with test, but nothing else. And I also, I don't know. I'm finding it difficult to support it. It's frustrating because I look at the report and everything says, yeah, we've no objection, but there are still objections in my mind. And also, I did note, and I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but a very good, a very good insight as to the need we have for housing and the need that it makes on people who are perhaps trying to remake their lives or to get started with their lives. I get it. I remember being in that place. But I do remember a statistic somewhere, and I could try to hunt it down, but I don't have it in front of me. It's the low-income housing that it's providing is not really the type I think that we need. I think I read somewhere we need 3-bedroom houses. There's a shortage of those that are low income. This is offering 1 and 2. 1 and 2 is great, but it's not actually, I think, what is the low-income housing that is needed at the moment. So, I don't know. I'm going to listen to the rest of the debate. Maybe my mind will be changed, but at the moment I'm finding it very, very difficult to accept these applications. Thank you.
come to you in a moment, Councillor Fletcher. I just want to invite the officers to respond.
Yes, I'll respond on just a few points that have been raised here. Just for context around the traffic count data, obviously the figure DFT 17,000 daily movements. It's anticipated this development would generate 565 daily movements. And obviously the test of the MPPF is whether that increase would result in highway safety issues or a severe cumulative impact on the highway network. So I'll leave you to make the judgment as to whether 506.
My point wasn't that this.
Yep, I'll go through the chair, please.
Sorry, Chair. May I just? My point there wasn't that this was going to add that much significantly, but I was saying that the basis of the safety of that area was based on false figures. So whether it's 17,000 or 18, a bit over 18.
Understood.
That's nearly double what West Sussex said.
Understood. I'm just providing context to make that decision. Highways Authority have looked at it and considered the figures that were provided were robust. I appreciate there's an alternative set of figures, but the Highway Authority haven't commented on those yet. In terms of the footpath to the south, that would be secured through the Section 106 obligation, and it would be through that process that would work with the County Rights of Way team to ensure that the footpath is deliverable. Obviously, in the first instance, it's preferable if the developer and the landowner agree how the footpath will be treated and fenced, but also county can then step in using their powers, rights of way powers. But that would be a pre-commencement matter in our mind. So it's therefore critically important that the final agreement there is reached, that it would be a usable path, that would be fenced, but also that fence could have gates in it, for instance, to allow access to the western parcel that you identified would be potentially cut off. So as officers, we feel that there is a solution there that would ensure the integrity of that path moving forward and the user of the land. In terms of the footpath along New Road and the commentary around not allowing two wheelchair users to pass, obviously the footpath is being provided to 1.5 metres, which is the minimum allowed for in the inclusive mobility document. We have just Googled actually the width of a wheelchair, and on average it's around 63 centimetres. So in theory, two wheelchairs would be able to pass each other on that 1.5 metre footway with a little bit of room to spare. In terms of commentary around affordable housing and the housing mix, that would get resolved at reserve matter stage, but I point you to page 77 of the officer report, which tabulates the affordable housing offer. If I just find it myself, and it talks about there being 20 of the 54 homes being 3 bedrooms or more. And we are acutely aware as officers, based on feedback from our housing team, of the need in the district for the larger affordable rent homes in particular. So the offer from the applicants is policy compliant in terms of meeting our SHMA and proportionality of smaller and larger homes, and the final details can be sorted out at reserve matters stage. A final point on the landscape impact, again, is, as my colleague here pointed out, the application site is 2 fields. The northern field visibility is very limited because of the topography. It's the southern field that would have more visibility, particularly looking northwards along Hilland Road. And it is through the buffer planting, the lower building heights, etc., and in the context where further south you are, that you have built development on either side, that officers feel that impact would not be significant or sufficient to warrant the refusal of planning permission. So it's bear in mind the mitigation there. Obviously it's a judgment that each and every one of you need to make on that point. But clearly I'm going to go back to the big item here, and that is the tilted balance. And clearly it applies in this case, and the test is that the harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefit. And obviously you've heard today concerns, other way round. Okay, I won't repeat it again. Apologies for that slip of the tongue. But the access, the sustainable access, has maximised what it can do within the constraints of New Road and the bridleway. And as officers, we feel that is sufficient to meet the requirements of policy. Whilst it might not be ideal, it might not be perfect to the exacting standards that, or guidance should I say, that is out there, it nevertheless provides for sustainable choices and sustainable modes. So that is why the recommendation of officers is that the application should be approved under that tilted balance. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. I'd like to particularly thank the officers for a very comprehensive report on these two applications. And also, I know they've gone to a great deal of effort to look at the problems associated with this and work with the applicant to overcome them, to try to get the development above the bar to make it acceptable. I'd also like to say that we've had some especially well thought through comments from the speakers from both sides on this application, and it's really helpful to have heard all those comments. This application, or the two applications, provide much needed houses, including affordable houses, including some of the larger affordable houses, which are particularly valuable to us. So although this is outside the built-up area boundary, and it relates quite badly to the existing settlement in Billingshurst, under the tilted balance, the bar for approval drops, and it is in line with the FAD document in terms of adjacency to the built-up area boundary and so on. It's close to the local shops. It's both the applications to me seem, I mean, they're very similar. I note the additional landscape buffer to the south in one of them. To me, the issues on approval or not don't turn on the differences between those two applications. For me, the key issue here is access and connectivity, in particular for active travel. And all the routes are substantially substandard as far as active travel is concerned. And we're talking about people walking to school or the shops, people who are cycling for everyday trips. This is year-round, day in, day out, sometimes in the dark, sometimes kids going on their own, and so on. So I've listened with particular interest to the speakers about that aspect as well. And I'm not an expert on the rural roads document that was quoted, but I believe that applies to HS2 rather than being a general document, although the guidance in it, you know, gives some very desirable criteria. And I listened about the guidance on inclusive mobility, which I've also looked up, and that is something that should have considerable weight. I think it's fair to note that some of the points that were raised about gradients and so on are more appropriate, and guardrails and so on were sort of more appropriate to urban pedestrian settings, because if you're in the landscape going over a period, you do have to respond to the profile of the landscape. But I say I'm not an expert at that. Nonetheless, I still have significant concerns about this connectivity. 1.5 metres for a footway is the absolute minimum. It's not the minimum that you have before the brambles shoot out in the middle of summer. It's the absolute minimum. And achieving and maintaining this minimum width relies on an unusually high level of maintenance, and hedges as they mature, and this is a hedge that will continue to sort of gain in vigour, do grow very fast in the summer, the time when most people are most likely to be wanting to use the footpath. Now, it's not necessarily by itself, that doesn't necessarily sort of make the case entirely, but let's also look at the road width. The road's being planned to be reduced to 4.8 metres. It is a road that people drive along pretty fast. And it's 4.8 metres wide and will have no space on one side because the hedge will be there directly, and then it will have the footway on the other side. Quite a lot of our local residents drive, for example, Land Rover Discoveries. A Land Rover Discovery, if you are driving it legally with the wing mirrors out, is 2 metres 22 centimetres wide. 2 of those are 4 metres 44 centimetres wide. That doesn't leave you a lot of space to avoid scratching your Land Rover on one side with the hedge, avoid clashing wing mirrors in the other side, and avoid the pedestrian on the pavement on the other side. If you drive up to the curb, your wing mirrors will overhang the pavement. And there is some terminology about curb shyness, which is used in design documents. Pedestrians don't like to go right next to the curb on fast roads because they quite rightly fear being knocked by wing mirrors. But they can't move over in this case if it's 1.5 metres with a hedge right next to it. There is only one passing spot there, which is a private driveway, and that's not visible, and that's over a distance of 275 metres. There's no lighting. There's no controlled crossing at the fast roundabout at the other end. So I have some real concerns about that as being a suitable route for people's children, people's parents, disabled people and so on, women or others who are worried about going out at night in the dark. Turning to the other routes, there's footpath 1942, and I noticed that the consultees on this were the West Sussex Public Right-of-Way, who, in line with their normal policy, looked at self-binding gravel surfaces. They also looked at a minimum of a 3 metre width, but didn't look at any sort of shoulder width for grass verge on either side, because they were looking at this as a public right-of-way, not something that would be used as a leisure route, that would be maintained perhaps to a public right-of-way standard, rather than for people to use all day, every day, in the rain, in the winter, and so on. And gravel does not stand up to regular use. It's not within Active Travel England guidance or Sustrans guidance to have gravel paths in what is, if this is built, effectively a suburban area. I note Councillor Bainham's comments about the lack of certainty of access across the triangular field, and that part of the path is actually outside the red application line. On the remaining path, there is a permissive proposal for permissive right-of-way, but this is only for 10 years. It's quite common to have permissive rights-of-way for 40 years. 10 years is not very long. And also, I'm concerned about the comments that it's perfectly acceptable to expect cyclists to dismount and walk for 75 metres. That is absolutely not what you would expect for cycling design under Active Travel England guidance. I feel this should have been looked at instead of under the public right-of-way lens. It should have been looked at under an Active Travel England lens. Their guidance applies to this, as it says in the report, and it's almost up to the level where it would automatically be forwarded to Active Travel England for their specific comments.
Councillor Fletcher, could you bring your comments to a conclusion, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, even under, I feel that it's very difficult because we are under the tilted balance on this, but I thought about whether we should be approving this, whether we should be deferring it, whether we should actually even be refusing it. And I looked, if I can just finish on this point, in terms of paragraph 11D2, which says it talks about having particular regard to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land and securing well-designed places. It refers to paragraph 110 about actively managing growth to support sustainable transport in the NPPF. Paragraph 115A about sustainable transport modes being prioritised, taking account of the vision for the site, the type of development and its location. And I think that those are really relevant. It talks about paragraph 135A, about functioning well, not just for the short term, but over the lifetime of the development. And just briefly to say this doesn't comply with the Billingshurst Policy 12. So I think it's nearly there in many ways, lots of good design in terms of responding to the landscape challenges, providing affordable housing.
Councillor Fletcher, could you conclude your comments, please? I've been very generous with your time.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. Any other councillor wants to make a comment? Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by thanking Councillor Fletcher for nicking half of my lines. But there you go. First thing, I'd like some clarity on, we're deciding this evening on all matters reserved except access, as I understand it. Does that include the footway design? So that's my first question. Perhaps that could be answered now, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The application is in outline with all matters reserved aside, except from access. So access is vehicular access and other means of access. So those are the ones that are up for discussion as part of the current application. So landscape, layout would be subject to reserved matters at a later date. So to clarify, the outline consent is being sought with access.
So in that case, it'd be possible to condition the footway design? Just at the moment, we don't seem to know what it is, other than it's got a width. And the reason, perhaps I should explain why I'm questioning this, is I'm well aware of what happens with narrow rural roads, especially when 4x4 vehicles get loose down them. And I have concerns this footway, in whatever condition it's in to start with, won't stay like that for very long.
Just to clarify, the Section 106 agreement would secure the delivery of the footway in, with the Highways Authority through the appropriate highways agreements as well. That includes maintenance.
But still, we're dealing with a somewhat unknown. Has it got a curb? I don't know.
Just to be clear, the designs that we've seen include a full curb, so it would be a fully engineered footway set above the carriageway.
With a tarmac surface?
Correct.
Right, okay. Thank you for that clarification. The other point, I think, is that I really do not, no, I do understand why direct access to the retail park isn't there, but I do wonder about the amount of effort that's gone into providing direct access for non-motorised users into that space. It would save a lot of effort, I'd have thought. But I think officers have had discussions with the developer, and perhaps they could expand on those discussions. Thank you.
Put simply, the applicants are proposing the footway solution. They have tried to explore, but understand that didn't get very far. But ultimately, we have to make a decision based on what's in front of us, which is the footway along New Road.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor van der Burg.
Just a clarification. Adrian, I think it was mentioned that the hedge cutting is permissible during the summer. There's a Just confirm that.
I did look at this up about a couple of hours ago off the government website around exemptions around trimming between 1st of March and 31st of August. And it says here that that's the cases where the hedgerow overhangs a highway, road or footpath over which there is a public or private right-of-way, and the overhanging hedgerow obstructs the passage of users, is a danger to users, or obstructs the view of users, or light from a lamp. So there are exemptions built into there, yes.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Can I just check? I'm on the planning committee, but I'm not a planning expert. So this is an outline application. I understand that with access issues. Is water neutrality part of that?
Yes, water neutrality is being resolved today.
So I have a couple of questions or concerns about that. Perhaps I should have asked this before, but it was actually raised by some comments that came through. What is the assessment of the carbon footprint of reverse osmosis? Because I understand that that is a very high carbon cost to that, and is that compliant with climate policies in the NPPF and HDC's policies? I understand it's something like 2.5 to 3.5 kilowatts per cubic metre.
That's not a question that's been asked of officers or environmental health experts or climate experts.
Sorry?
That's not a question we have asked in our consideration of this application.
It is an important question. I think it is, personally.
My answer is we don't have the answer.
Okay. Well, I think we do need to have the answer before we go ahead with this. And then the other thing is, resident Neil Payne raised an important issue about the reliability of water from the boreholes. And I heard what you said about the testing that was done, but it's not constant day in, day out testing. And in the report, I'm sorry, my laptop has lost power, so I didn't catch the place, but the report says that that officers are reasonably confident that there's good water data groundwater data can be relied on. I would want full confidence rather than reasonable confidence when we're talking about 125 residences being supplied with water for 80 years, or else having none. So I would be interested in both of those. And given what Councillor Fletcher was saying and concerns about accessibility as well, I wonder if we could move to defer judgment on this pending the answers to our questions.
In terms of the carbon footprint point, obviously we have granted boreholes elsewhere, and it's not a question that's been raised of officers. As my colleague said, we don't have that information before us. I think it would be difficult to just refuse it on that basis.
I'm not suggesting refusing, I'm saying deferring.
No, I'm just responding to your comment, Councillor Fletcher. I think it would be difficult to refuse it on that basis, and obviously we do need to be consistent in our decision making. And I've completely forgot what your question was, Councillor Fisher.
So the other one was about the reliability of the water and whether we could commission a report.
Yeah, apologies.
To actually confirm that.
Hopefully members, well, I haven't said this for a while at committee, and I know it's a strange term, but I think members may recall the point where we say we're looking at certainty, not absolute certainty, with regard to water neutrality, and we have to be reasonable in our approach. And obviously there is some significant testing that's taken place here. We have no objection from the Environment Agency or our own external consultants who have looked at it, or our own environmental health colleagues. And I think we have a wealth of evidence that's saying that it is acceptable. And I think members have to think, well, what evidence do we have before us to say it's not? And I think we have to be reasonable. I don't think it's reasonable to ask them to test every single day. You know, we're not here to seek absolute certainty. And the approach here is consistent with other decisions that we've made. So I think we can't be asking for something different when we've granted boreholes elsewhere or resolved a grant in that approach. So I think we have to be mindful of that, and I think officers are confident this has been properly considered, and we consider that the scheme will be water neutral, subject to the matters that will be secured by conditions and the legal agreement. Thank you.
So can I just come back on that? Is that possible? Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to kind of just to voice, you know, the emperor in new clothes moment that's happening here, which is that we're basically as members in between a rock and a hard place. We're told we have to approve it because of the tilted balance, and yet it doesn't feel right, and we know that if we do refuse it, then it's very likely that the developers will go to appeal and that will get allowed, and that ultimately the ratepayers will pay that. So I honestly don't know how, I don't really understand what the point of a meeting here is, other because if we raise issues and they're not, you don't have the answer, we still have to go ahead and make a judgment.
I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Clark, and I'll seek advice on this for a moment. Just bear with me.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with Councillor Fisher's interpretation of the tilted balance being an absolute certainty. The bar is high, but it's not a certainty that you've just been brought here to rub stamp something. That's not how it works.
Councillor Clark. Thank you, Chairman. Passing comment I would make that you might not consider continuous testing of the output. You would consider testing continuously the output of the water treatment facility, even if you don't test the input continuously. But I would have thought if you're prudent, you would do that. I did raise a question in writing earlier on. If I refer to paragraph 6.128, page 94, and paragraph 6127, page 151, in terms of maintenance of the treatment systems, the text very clearly talks in the water neutrality statement that there's high levels of turbidity in the water, and possibly that means not only suspended particulate matter, but you've got colloidal issues in the borehole and the treatment of the water. Coming back to what was said by some of the speakers, but I've had no assurance, I'm also concerned about the case of maintenance in all the systems. I refer to the table in the water neutrality document, which was in the backing papers, when it talks about maintenance taking place in the reverse osmosis system and the existing system. And I am concerned, one, in terms of the bridging the gap caused by the annual maintenance of the system, whether you've got enough storage, because I've seen nothing in the documentation about water storage systems, or if it's there, I've missed it. And basically, you've got various bits of equipment that are maintained at monthly, 6 monthly, 3 monthly, and annual. I don't know if it's appropriate to raise it at this point, but I think the conditions need to be tougher than what they are in the document before we approve this. I mean, if I look at the developer's paperwork in the Invicta water treatment table, page 11 backing document, it's quite light on detail. I'm afraid I'm quite a details person, and if you're going to entrust the water supply to development purely on borehole water and on a reverse osmosis system, which I'm aware of because I've seen it in industry, from the industry I come from, so it's not a problem. Technology is fine. I just want somewhere an assurance that the conditions are tough enough to make sure that they don't run out of water, because it wouldn't be fair on the residents. I know the environmental health team are aware of the issues associated with boreholes, but I've not seen anything in writing giving me that assurance.
No, just advise members of the suite of conditions that have been recommended by our environmental health team, and you're nodding that you've seen condition 8 around investigation, and particularly the other one is condition 21, which talks in detail about management and how the sampling will take effect, etc., and maintenance of the systems themselves. Those have been drawn up by environmental health officers on the understanding and knowledge that they are responsible ultimately for ensuring a safe supply here.
If I may, Chairman, yeah, I've read them. I'm not convinced they're tight enough.
Come back to you in a moment, Councillor Clark. Councillor Marks.
Thank you, Chair. Just drawing your attention to regulatory condition 36 on page 109. Just going to read from it. No unit hereby permitted shall be connected to or draw supply from the mains water supply except for emergency purposes. Am I to take that to mean that the houses will not be connected to the mains except in the case of an emergency, which seems slightly risky? I would imagine they wouldn't be connected anyway. And so I would assume that they're only allowed to draw water from the mains in the case of an emergency. I was wondering if the officer could tell us, in their experience of other developments where housing is dependent on boreholes, if there's a tendency on the part of householders to switch to the mains because they feel it's cleaner, safer, that kind of thing.
Very valid questions, and this is resolved simply by each individual home would not have a mains connection. The mains connection would sit at the borehole pump part of the site. So it'd be one connection point. So if there's an emergency, an issue with supply, there'd be one connection that would then provide mains for the whole development through the existing pipe system. So you wouldn't get 125 individual main connections.
Okay, so a standpipe, effectively.
Councillor Clark, did you want to make an amendment to the condition?
Not quite, well, I'm not really qualified technically to do it.
Okay.
I'm just expressing a concern that it's not tight enough. I'm sure the officers from the Environment and Health can look at it and see if they can tighten it up.
Okay. Councillor Fisher.
Just a supplementary question with regard to the reverse osmosis and its high electricity consumption. Who would pay for that? I couldn't see anything in the document. Will that be covered by the householders?
It would be through the maintenance charge, most likely.
Okay. Any idea of how much that would be, an addition?
Not at all.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Knowles.
Chair. This is the first time in the water neutrality conversations and boreholes that I've heard reverse osmosis mentioned as a method. And so I think it is really, it may have been used before, but I haven't heard it mentioned by name. And I think it is very important that we make sure it is compliant with our, in the carbon usage in this instance, because if we do grant this, then we will be creating a precedents that may then go forward on that. I also wanted to ask about the cycle routes through the industrial estate or the trading park. Is it possible to see the slide on that, please? Because I didn't quite understand it. So the housing is beneath the start of this. Oh, it's to the right of it.
The application
Yes.
site is to the right-hand side of that lower
And
right
so
screen.
they will have access, the residents will have access to the estate on a cycle path.
So to get to that point from the right-hand side of the screen,
Yeah.
it'd be cycling down New Road,
Okay.
and then joining at the roundabout into the trade park, into the existing cycleway that was built as part of the trade park development.
All right, thank you.
Just to say, we have had other applications that are proposing reverse osmosis, so it's not new. So you know, it is something that we have already considered and dealt with, and indeed recommended approval for in the district. Thank you.
If it's brief, Councillor Fletcher.
Well, it was to say that if everybody's had their say, then it seems to me that Councillor Clark's concern could be met by an agreement to allow the condition to be determined under delegation. The access issues, I think, are more difficult. I don't think deferment actually helps, because the things that would resolve it are to do with the access that's outside of the control of the developer across, so access instead of along New Road directly into the park, the trade park, and access agreement across the triangle of land. So I think the question is whether we should be looking at a motion to refuse based on that. And I'm looking to understand what the feeling is in the room on that.
Okay, before we come to that motion, proposal, does Councillor Trollope or Councillor Bailey want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I said in my original remarks that I'd be listening carefully to the debate around the room, and what I haven't heard is much in support of this, and that's sort of ending my view. That's all I would say.
Thank you.
I personally, I get that technically that things are quote approved, but it's always on the minimum standard. I just feel that this is in certain respects, this is a substandard application. It's not one that I'm prepared to uphold. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, do you have a motion you wish to put forward?
Well, in that case, I will put forward, having given this very great thought, because it is a difficult decision, a motion to refuse. I don't have actual wording, and I'm looking to the officer for help, but I know we've had some discussions about this as a possible outcome. So this would be a motion to refuse basically on access for active travel. But I think, given the concern about the water, that it would be perhaps useful if Councillor Clark would add some words to make sure that that gets caught up in that, if he feels that's appropriate. So I think it's that it would be that it's against policy 40 on active travel and policy 11 Billy 12 which is on cycling due to the lack of quality on that. But I was also referencing the latest edition of NPPF about securing the reference in paragraph 11D2, and then the note which talks about a sustainable location. I think access is needed to make this sustainable, about securing well-designed places, and I think the access makes this, better access would make this well-designed, about paragraph 110 in the NPPF, actively managing growth to support sustainable transport, paragraph 115A, prioritising sustainable transport modes, and paragraph 135A, in particular reference to the maintenance on the hedging that will function well, not just for the short term, but over the lifetime of the development.
Okay, I'm going to call an adjournment for 5 minutes so that you can construct the motion. The officers are not entitled to write it for you, but they can provide advice on the content on it. Thank you. So,
Do you want a seconder before we do that?
no, then the motion is.
Okay, okay. Very fair point, very fair point.
Thank you. Okay, so Okay, we have a motion from Councillor Fletcher.
So the refusal reason motioned by Councillor Fletcher, it's fairly long, says, the proposed development, by reason of the substandard access for walking, wheeling and cycling, derived from the practical limitations of the use of the footway on New Road and the suitability of the year-round servicing of footpath 1942 and uncertainty over its fencing within the field, fails to accord with policy 40 of the HDPF, Bill 12 of the Billingshurst Neighbourhood Plan, and paragraphs 110, 115A and 135A of the NPPF.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Trollope. Before we go to the vote, just hand over to the Head of Development and Building Control.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously a motion has been put forward and it's been seconded. Before we go to the vote, I just want to remind members that obviously the officers are recommending approval here. We are in the tilted balance at Horsham. We don't have a 5-year housing land supply. Our housing numbers are significant and have just increased as part of the new NPPF. And obviously that carries significant weight in favour of granting the development. You've heard from my colleagues the benefits that the scheme offers, including the number of affordable housing, which is above policy requirements. It's therefore the officers' view that the adverse impacts do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. However, obviously there's a motion been put forward to refuse, which has been seconded, and obviously we'll now go to the vote. Thank you.
Okay, you will have heard.
Can I confirm that this will cover the two applications? Or do we have to do this twice?
No, this will cover the first application and then we'll vote on the second application, as I mentioned at the start of the committee meeting. Thank you. Okay, you've heard the motion. It's been seconded. All those in favour of the motion? Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? Okay. Right, therefore, DC 240749 has been refused. I now move to vote on DC 240887. All those.
For the purpose of clarity, it would be beneficial if Councillor Fletcher could just confirm that the alternative motion stands for A8 and seconded before we go to the vote. Thank you. Yes.
Can we have the vote on DC 240887, please? All those in favour of the motion? Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? Okay, therefore the application DC 240887 has been refused. Thank you. Okay, thank you. We now move to DC 240031, Four Seasons Fuel, Coneyhurst Road, Coneyhurst, Billingshurst. And please could the officer make their presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is an application for hazardous substances consent. This is not a planning permission, but rather provides control over the presence of hazardous substances, whether or not an associated planning permission is required. Consent is required for the presence of certain quantities of hazardous substances, and the process ensures that necessary measures are taken to prevent major accidents and limit consequences to people and the environment through the regulation of the storage and use of hazardous substances. So the consent is required as the two 14-ton cylinders proposed to hold the liquefied petroleum gas would exceed the controlled quantity threshold of 25 tonnes on the site, where the total LPG on site would be 49 tonnes. Since the publication of the committee report, an additional 3 representations have been received. These have raised similar concerns as those summarised within the report, and have also raised concerns with alleged unsafe business practices at the site and the risk to safety. So the application site, shown in red here, is located to the south of Coneyhurst Road, outside of any designated built-up area boundary. The site is therefore located within the countryside. The site comprises an established commercial enterprise and includes an existing warehouse, a number of porta cabins, and areas of hard standing used for open storage and parking. As shown by the aerial photo, the site is bound by mature vegetation to the south, east and west, with agricultural fields located to the south and west. A sporadic mix of residential and commercial units are located along Coneyhurst Road, with the nearest residential properties located immediately to the east and west of the site boundaries. The two 14-ton cylinders subject to the consent application, annotated as Tank A and Tank B on the site plan and showed arrowed, are located to the northeast of the site. These tanks are already in place on site and are currently managed under the threshold limit. So this hazardous substances consent application seeks the use of the cylinders for their full capacity, being a maximum of 49 tonnes of LPG in total. Other substances are sold on the site, but these do not meet the controlled quantity threshold, and they are considered to be fractional contributions that do not require specific consent in themselves. The application form outlines how the site will be operated and managed, including delivery and dispatch to and from the site and hours of operation, and this is outlined within paragraphs 6.13 to 6.16 of the committee report, and these measures will be secured by condition as outlined in section 7 of the committee report. So these are the elevations of the two 14-ton cylinders. As shown, they are above ground, and each tank would benefit from its own connection point used for loading and unloading of the LPG into transport tankers. So these are the photos of the site and showing the cylinders currently in situ, and these sit within the established commercial site. So as outlined, the application relates to hazardous substances consent for the two 14-ton cylinders to store LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, alongside other substances, with the other substances outside of the control of it. The dashed red outline shown around the area is the controlled hazardous substances area. The purpose of the consent application is to ensure that necessary measures are taken to control the presence of hazardous substances, whether or not an associated planning permission is required. It is not a requirement that hazardous substance consent application be determined alongside a planning application. The consent process specifically regulates the storage and use of hazardous substances, where the Health and Safety Executive is a statutory consultee. The HSE has assessed the risks to the surrounding area's population arising from the proposed operations and likely activities associated with the maximum quantity of hazardous substances proposed, and it has been concluded that the risk to the surrounding population is small and that there are no significant reasons on safety grounds for refusing the consent application. West Sussex Fire and Rescue have confirmed that they have all the information required to assist crews if attending an incident on site, and the Water and Access Manager has confirmed that there is suitable access to a fire hydrant as well as an appropriately sized water storage tank on site. No concerns have therefore been raised in this regard. And the Environment Agency has confirmed that the proposal would be below their threshold for comment and would pose no risk to controlled waters as the tanks themselves are stored above ground. It is considered that there are no unacceptable risks to the environment or public amenity associated with the application, and the application is therefore recommended for approval subject to condition 1 as outlined in the report. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Could I invite Amanda Jupp, please? You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Amanda Jupp and I am the County Councillor for Billingshurst. I am representing 15 residents living in close proximity to the Four Seasons fuel depot who have concerns about this application in connection with working hours and the impact on the environment. I declare an interest as we live to the southeast of the site behind Johnson's Yard. Historically, this site was a small holding, but like other similar places in rural areas, it has diversified into an industrial site. It has expanded substantially since the original site was destroyed by a fire in 2011, and the business now sells a considerable amount of gas and logs. Mr. Harris employs 40 people, most of whom live locally. There are 2 substantial gas tanks mounted on concrete, which are situated on the northeast of the site, close to Johnson's Yard, not the north, as mentioned in 1.5 of the report. This application refers to these tanks being filled to their full capacity of 49 litres. At present, they are only partially filled. Cylinders are filled from the tanks on a daily basis in the commercial market. HGVs and tankers come in and out of the site in the early mornings and late afternoons. The site is always busy. There is high demand for the fuel, and as you would expect, the noise level is high. The empty cylinders are also stored on concrete, so the noise is often amplified with their movement on the site and when filled onto the lorries. Coneyhurst is primarily a residential settlement, and the site is situated close to several houses, particularly to the northwest and southeast of the A272, as you will have seen from the original plan. There are others that are not shown on the plan. In an ideal situation, this site should be on an industrial estate away from housing. If this application is approved, please may I request that conditions are placed on it to restrict working hours from 8 AM to 6 PM, Monday to Friday, and 8 AM to 1 PM on Saturdays. Under 1.7 of the report, I quote that the site is bound to the south, east and west by mature vegetation, but in my opinion, it is sparse. I understand that the owners are happy to plant trees and shrubs on the south, west and north boundaries. So again, I would welcome conditions relating to the addition of this landscaping, as well as the expansion of the acoustic fencing along these boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no further speakers. The officers wish to come back on that point.
I think going back to my colleague's presentation, we just need to be mindful it is not a permission for the tanks itself. So visual impact is not really a material planning ground to this assessment. It's about the safety elements of it. It may be the case that the tanks themselves require planning permission. I know we've requested a planning application to be submitted, but that's not what's before you today. It's for the liquid itself, the gas itself, that is seeking consent. So, you know, things like landscaping would not be appropriate for this because it's not a planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bainham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Jupp in her remarks there referred to requesting hours of operation. And I notice in paragraph 616, which is on page 177, it talks about hours of operation, and for the last sentence, for clarity and to ensure future enforcement is achievable, this is recommended to be added as a condition of this consent. I'm wondering, in the light of what Emma's just said, whether this is a relevant Or is this just relevant to when the planning comes in for the actual tanks? Or is it relevant for this particular application?
Yes, so condition 1, as recommended, covers the information provided within the application form as well as the specified drawings. So the application form includes those specific hours of working conditions, so it would be covered via that condition 1.
Okay, because I didn't see that, but yes, thanks for that. And the other question I have is, Councillor Jupp mentioned hours. I think you said 8 till 5 and 8 till 1 on Saturdays, I think she said.
8 till 6 and 8 till 1 on the Saturday.
8 till 6, which are less than, as is stated in the report, which go from 6 till 7 on weekdays and 8 till 5 on Saturdays. Is there a commercial norm that we could sort of benchmark this against?
I mean, for a commercial business of this type, it's that the hours that they're presenting aren't unusual.
Okay. Well, in that case, they're subject to, I'm happy with the officer's recommendations, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Trollope.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, it's one of those where, you know, I would be nervous living next to such a company, but we have assurances from all the relevant authorities that this is acceptable. Yeah, I have in my inbox, I have quite a number of local residents who are very unhappy, and quite frankly, they're quite frightened. I would admit, due to the lack of knowledge of what this is and what the mitigations are, but who are nevertheless very worried about this tank, this fuel, and this proposal. So I don't know in what way, you know, I can go back to them and give them reassurances, but the fact remains is that there are lots of very worried local residents, and I'm not certain that, you know, I do know that they were sent a letter in January telling them of this application coming up, but whether or not there was sufficiently good communication and discussion with those who live nearby. I don't know whether or not the company itself, Four Seasons, have made overtures to the local residents, trying to work perhaps to some, you know, common working compromises. One of the complaints that I have heard, which I do think is relevant, is the noise, and particularly the empty canisters. You know, it could be easily buffered, and other mitigations could happen. My suggestion is, Ismail, I understand that the actual 2 tanks that are there at the moment installed don't yet have planning permission. Yeah, that's my understanding. And those items that Councillor Jupp has suggested in her speech as a local resident, I think are good step forwards, and I think they're achievable and fair. And I don't think they would be onerous by Four Seasons to implement. Things like working hours, things like coming up with ways of mitigating the noise that they're making when they're doing their job. There must be ways of doing it. So I don't know if we could defer the decision, because to be honest, the decision we're going to make today, I'm not sure how much sense it is to make, because we don't even have permissions for the tanks yet. So could we, you know, would it be possible to say, look, let's just not decide this matter tonight, let's decide it along with the tanks? And as well, put in some mitigatory controls to make the working practices, the working hours more acceptable to the local residents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlotte. A couple of points there. I think it's always a challenge when you have commercial businesses in relatively close proximity to residential. Obviously, that's an established relationship. The site's there, it has a lawful use, and we have to balance that. And I think we need to be mindful of not putting overly restrictive conditions on businesses that then inhibits them the ability to operate. And I think, you know, a reasonable suggestion has been put forward, and that was by the applicants. And I think we just need to be mindful of that. You might have seen the Nowhurst Business Park. Well, whilst we won that appeal on 24-hour operations, it was only because of the impact on the landscape, not actually on the impact on neighbours, which was quite surprising, but that was 24 hours. So I think we just need to be mindful. I think officers are of the view that the hours proposed strike that balance, and I would be concerned about making it overly restrictive. That might then have an impact on the business itself. In terms of your question around the planning application, at this moment in time, a planning application has been invited. My colleague and I were looking at the history and Google Maps and that earlier, and they've been there for a little while. If they're there for 4 years, they're lawful by the passage of time, but there is a question mark over whether they've been there for 4 years or not. So I think that's something we need to look into further as to whether we continue to invite an application. But notwithstanding that, we can't reasonably hold up this application to wait for something that has not yet been submitted and we don't have a timescale. And it's not unreasonable for the applicant to want to know whether the principle of this storage of this on site is acceptable before they then go to the expense of submitting a planning application. You know, I don't think that's an unreasonable approach. So I don't think we can defer it just for that basis. Obviously, I'm not an expert in the storage of this proposal, but you know, as part of this, we have discussed it with our own environmental health colleagues, and we've got our statutory comment from the Health and Safety Executive, and I think I'd struggle to see how we can oppose an additional conditions on. However, if members felt that was necessary to make the development acceptable, then I think the best bet would be to delegate approval subject to further consideration of those points, because you know, we don't deal with these types of applications very often. I think we just need to be sure that we legitimately could add other things on. I'm not convinced at this moment in time, and obviously they've not been requested by the Health and Safety Executive. My view is the proposal before us is acceptable with the details submitted, but as I said, if members are particularly concerned, then that would be my suggestion in terms of a course of action. Thank you.
May I come back, Chair, just on one point?
Come to Councillor Trollope then.
Right, thank you. Just, in my view, the risk that they took was when they installed the tanks. It's you know, those tanks were installed, they knew they didn't have permission at that time for the tanks themselves, or for that matter, to fill it. So the risk is on them. They've already taken it.
It is a risk doing something without planning permission, but that's not material to the assessment of the application before you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor van der Berg.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, if they were built without planning permission, do we know whether building control played a hand in overseeing the construction of them? And if they're suddenly going to carry another sort of 10 tonnes each, perhaps we ought to ensure that they've been put up properly.
I doubt very much building regulations would have been required for them, because they're not buildings that are occupied, or they're just structures. But ultimately, if planning permission is required, then we would have to do that assessment. If they've been there for a period of time and they're lawful, then you know. But there are other legislation that governs matters like this outside of the planning system, and we've seen comments from West Sussex Fire and Rescue, they've been to the site, I think, haven't they? Yeah, so that you know, it's certainly on their radar, and they are actively managing that with the applicants in accordance with their own due process. Thank you.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to point out that in parts of the district, we don't have gas piped. So we have residents in Cowfold who rely on services from Four Seasons for their LPG gas. And also, I think this will reduce the number of vehicle movements because they will only need to fill, they'll be able to fill fully the tanks. So there will be less HGVs. It's not necessarily going to increase the amount of business because they're currently filling them every day, which they won't need to do anymore. I think it's important that they're allowed to continue to run their business.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'm also concerned about the hours. I think 6 o'clock in the morning is far too early, and if it wasn't an industrial estate, it would probably be the minimum of 7 o'clock before they were allowed to open up. And it does feel very, very early in the morning, especially for the local residents. My other thoughts are around the Sundays and bank holidays. I suspect it's opened every Sunday on bank holiday for emergency call-outs, because I suspect there's always an emergency call-out for some reason. Do we have an indication of how many Sundays and bank holidays that it's opened and the hours in which they are opened? Because I'm assuming if there's an emergency call out, whether it's before 6 o'clock in the morning or after 7 o'clock in the evening, they're probably going anyway. So is there a log of those?
As outlined in the committee report, they're only proposing to open on those particular Sundays and public holidays if there is an emergency. We don't have any information as to how many they anticipate might happen in a year.
Sorry, just to add, it's also important to note that there are, you know, once the site's got a lawful use, there are no operating hours. We don't understand there are any operating hours existing on the site. So you know, they can operate, and ultimately, whilst this relates to the storage of fuel, it doesn't fundamentally change the use of the site. So I think it's difficult to say how this, and we've heard from Councillor Knowles, and perhaps it would even reduce vehicle movements to the site. So I think it's difficult in terms of this specific application. Does it result in a greater impact that now warrants a restriction that's not already on the existing site? Thank you.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask the Head of Development, I get the message we can't defer this one, or you're advising against. Is it possible to make it conditional, though, on the tanks getting planning approval?
I think the answer is no, Councillor Croker. It's not reasonable because they're completely separate proposals. This has hazardous substance consent. The other one is for the and you need one and the other. You need both, but ultimately you can apply for them separately. And you know, just because you're granting this doesn't mean that you're therefore granting the storage tanks, because you're not. You would consider that separately. I appreciate it might be helpful to have them both together, but that's not what's been submitted, and we need to consider what's been submitted, and we can't reasonably hold up a decision because something we would like has not been submitted. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to echo the conditions of operation. 6 a.m. is a bit early, but I mean, technically speaking, I mean, these are two small cigars. They're not very much. I mean, gas tankers on the road are bigger than that. They come in at over 20 tons, getting over 25 tons of, you know, propane or butane. So technically speaking, I don't see a problem. They've got the adequate fire suppression system because they've got a cloud system for water to water shower if there's a problem. Water shower will either quench a flame or absorb the gas. So I don't see it as a big problem.
Councillor Fisher.
Just wondered if we could take up the Head of Development's offer to delegate the decision pending conditions put on them around both hours of business and the tree planting, if possible, please.
Not tree planting then, if that's not possible. Take that one out, but hours of working, please, thank you. I think the general room mood would be 8 till 6 weekdays and 8 till 1 Saturdays.
Councillor Knowles.
Sorry, I've just checked. Their opening hours are 9 to 5 p.m. and Saturday 9 to 1 p.m. These are the hours that they need.
Operating hours?
No, that I understand they're different, absolutely, but they need to run their business. And they need to have access, they need to be able to set up, they need to be able to take deliveries when they can come in. That if we impose these sorts of conditions on them, they don't want to work longer hours, they have to pay their staff. They want to work the minimum hours they possibly can, but they have to be able to run their business.
It's open to members to delegate it, but what if you were to do that, I would suggest it's for further consideration of the opening hours rather than stating something. As I said, my concern is and as Councillor Knowles said, it's too restrictive, and I would just refer back to the Nowhurst Business Park application in Billingshurst. Yes, it was a slightly different commercial enterprise, but that was a large business park in the countryside with residential properties backing onto the site. And they were wanting 24-hour operations. We refused it due to impact on neighbours and the impact on the landscape. The inspector only upheld the impact on the wider landscape and not the impact on the neighbours. I think we always need to strike a balance, and I am concerned we put overly restrictive conditions on businesses that then make them difficult to operate, and we can't sustain an appeal. That decision is with you, members. I'm only here to give you advice, but that's my advice to you today. Thank you.
Councillor Fisher, yes.
So then can I just propose that we delegate decision with a view to looking at the hours further? Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that? Okay, Councillor Clark. Those, we seconded it. All those in favour of that proposal? Oh, sorry, Councillor.
I just have a question on that. So if we delegate it to yourselves, then your decision could be to leave it as is.
If Councillor Bain and you, or whoever Councillor Fisher put forward the motion, was it? Yeah. If you wish that to be in consultation with local members and the chair, or that's entirely up to you. I think we have to be mindful. If we consider that, if we look at the HSC guidance, if we chat to environmental health, consider the economic development impacts. If the view is yes, it should stay the same, then that is a potential outcome. But I think it's something that can be explored further with further information related to all those matters to be then better informed to make that view. But ultimately, yes, you can defer it, but I think I'm just conscious of holding up an application where we can resolve it and allow the business to move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Trollope, I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Fisher, apologies. Last comment from Councillor Trollope.
Thank you. Sorry,
Councillor Fisher.
With respect to all that, I still have had numerous contact from local residents stating how, the operations of this company are impacting in some cases, quite severely their quality of life. There's talks of venting, because I'm not an expert, but when they fill the tank, it's apparently a normal process. A certain amount will get vented. Well, that act of being vented, depending on the wind, goes into the neighbors' yards and, causes them to be unable to use their yard. And this happens, they have allegations that they're unable to use their backyards for large periods of time, that they're unable to sleep with the windows closed most days, again, from the daily operational noise that this company makes. And I understand it's a business. I understand we don't want to stop them from doing their business and helping with the economy and helping with the local residents. But the fact is, the way the company is operating at the moment does impact their lives. My personal view is that they're probably in the wrong location. Maybe they've outgrown their premise and they need to move. I don't know, but rubber stamping them the ability to fill up the tanks more, and I appreciate it might, I hadn't actually thought of that as an impact. I think it's great if it does reduce the vehicle movements, that's great, because that's one of the chief complaints. But I just find it really distasteful to have to ignore 5 sets of emails of, you know, numerous correspondence of people saying that they just find it really difficult to live where they're living, and they were there before this company. They were there, and also, sorry, there's a point I wanted to make in my closing statement, I'll make it now. Again, there was an explosion at this site in 2011. There was an evacuation of all those residents in 2011. I looked really hard. I asked the fire service. Nobody's told, nobody knows, or no, it's not in the public domain, as to what happened. So if we don't know what's happened, and they're looking at increasing their capacity, then what's going on? I'm sorry, it's like, and for me, this is relevant. When accidents happen, and accidents do happen, you learn from it. You put in mitigations. What are the mitigations that they took? There's no record of it anywhere I've seen. What sort of fencing do they have around the boundary? Malicious actors. They have now 40,000 tanks, 2 of them, 45,000 litres I think it was, filled up with LPG. What if there's a malicious actor? Okay, I know there's CCTV, I've been told there's CCTV coverage. That's not going to stop somebody quickly enough. It needs proper fencing. It needs, and again, none of this is, and we're going to say, oh, it's not within our domain, it's not within our remit to look at. But it is, it should be.
I think it's been explained, well, I'll pass over to it.
Sorry,
it's been explained that would be part of an application for the tanks, not for a licence to actually fill the tanks with LPG.
They don't have planning permission for the tanks. I don't know at what point they can start filling.
Thank you. The officer will come back on you.
I think it needs to be recognised that the wider site has a lawful use, the storage of these sorts of materials. Obviously, that due to the quantum, this particular hazardous substance consent has been submitted, but the site has a lawful use. Yes, there are residential properties in close proximity, but that's not unusual with a commercial business to have some residential properties around it. In terms of this particular application and your concerns, Councillor Trollope, the fire service have been consulted. They visited the site, and obviously as part of this application we're satisfied that those risks have been managed. I can't comment on what happened in 2011, I don't know, but ultimately we're considering the proposal before us, and the fire service have been engaged and are satisfied. In terms of the neighbours' concerns regarding the business more generally, that's not material to us today in terms of what's happened already on the site. However, I am aware that neighbours have been requested to fill out monitoring forms, following complaints to our compliance and environmental health teams. And obviously, if there is a breach of environmental health legislation or planning conditions, then we can consider that, but we can only act on that if we've got evidence, and that requires evidence to be submitted by those in the locality. It's not for today, but I think it's important to note that there is a legitimate process which, if there are breaches, then they can be considered. Thank you.
The microphone over there, if you turn it on, thank you. Councillor Fisher, do you want to give the wording for this proposal, motion, exactly, so we could...
We might need some help with this, but basically that a motion to delegate the decision to planning officers in consultation with ward members and the chair of Planning South. If I've missed anything out, please.
But for what reason, Councillor Fisher?
To look carefully at the hours of operation.
Could I include the Cabinet Member for Economic Development in that?
If Councillor Fisher wishes to, it's her motion.
I don't think that's necessary in this case. Is that a bad thing?
Can I just clarify, Councillor Fisher, is to delegate with a view to approval.
Yes.
In consultation with ward members and the chairman of the committee, subject to the further consideration of the operating hours of the business.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, the motion put forward, you can second it.
Yeah, it was seconded by Councillor Clark. Yeah, so the vote is
To delegate approval in consultation with the ward members and the chairman and subject to further consideration of the
all those in favour of that particular. Okay. Those against? Okay. Any abstentions? No. Okay, therefore the application is passed based on that delegated responsibility. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was a bit unclear that the application is passed based on that delegated responsibility. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item, got my notes, number 10, which is DC 240862, South House Farm, Marringding Road, Billingshurst. And I invite the officer to make the presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this application seeks full planning permission for the erection of one dwelling. This application is submitted as an alternative to a prior approval granted for the conversion of the existing building to a residential dwelling under planning reference DC 220435. So as shown here, the application site comprises an agricultural building and Grade 2 listed buildings known as Old Stable Cottage and South House Farm. The site is located outside of any defined built-up area boundary and is therefore within the countryside in policy terms. So the site is surrounded by agricultural fields with residential development located to the west and northwest, with a cluster of glass houses also located to the west. The two residential dwellings within the site comprise Grade 2 listed buildings, as shown by the stars, with these dwellings proposed to be retrofit as part of the water strategy, and this would be controlled by condition. Following consultation with the Design and Conservation Officer, it is considered that while the proposal would be within close proximity to these listed buildings, given the distance and relationship between the properties, the proposed development would not have a detrimental impact on the character, appearance and setting of these designated heritage assets. So the proposed dwelling would be located to the east of the application site, as shown here, and the site would be accessed by a new driveway extending from the southwestern corner, with parking and turning for two vehicles provided. The dwelling would also benefit from private amenity space. So here are the existing plans of the building. As previously mentioned, there is an extant prior approval on the site for the conversion of this building to a residential dwelling. An HOA application for that prior approval has been approved, which demonstrates water neutrality, and the pre-commencement conditions have been discharged. And that means that this prior approval is considered to represent a realistic fallback, and this is a material consideration of significant weight in the assessment of the current application. So the proposed dwelling, as shown here, would be of similar size and proportion to the existing building, and would utilise design features that would be reflective of the former building and the rural vernacular of the area. So these photos show the existing building as seen from the proposed access, where the existing boundary vegetation would be retained. The site is located outside of the built-up area and is not allocated within the local plan or Billingshurst neighbourhood plan, and as a result, residential development in this location would conflict with the requirements of policies 2 and 4 of the HDPF, and as the development is not essential to its countryside location, it would also conflict with policy 26. It is, however, recognised that the application site benefits from an extant prior approval for the conversion of the building, and this is considered to represent a realistic fallback which establishes the principle of residential development on the site. The proposed development would improve the quality of accommodation and would offer improvements in energy efficiency and sustainability, as well as design. And the proposal would reflect a traditional housing vernacular anticipated within a rural location and is considered to relate sympathetically to the character and built form of the wider surroundings. The proposal would not result in harm to the amenities of nearby residential properties and would not have a detrimental impact on the safety and function of the public highway. And having been through the appropriate assessment process, the proposal can demonstrate water neutrality. For these reasons, the development is recommended for approval as a departure from the development plan, subject to the conditions listed in section 7 of the committee report. Thanks.
Thank you very much. There are no public speakers on this particular item, and so once again I invite Councillor Bainham as a ward councillor to comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Okay, so we already have permission for a conversion, and the replacement is probably going to be a better job than the conversion. We had a very similar case to this, I think, in the last planning committee, and it's I think that passed unanimously, and I think this one should probably do so as well.
Thank you. Councillor Trollope.
Thank you. I have nothing to add. I'm prepared to go to vote in favour when we do. So I couldn't find my words.
It's okay. Thank you. It's getting late. Any other members like to comment on this? No? Okay, then we'll go immediately to the vote. The recommendation is to approve planning permission subject to the appropriate conditions. Those for? Unanimous, okay. Before the application is approved. Moving on, I don't have any urgent business, but I would like to thank the officers for their comprehensive committee report, presentations and contributions this evening, as well as the members for their engagement and reasoned debate. May I take this opportunity to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a happy and prosperous New Year. And at 21:50, and to the officers, yes, as well. I meant them as well, but obviously didn't come out clear enough. And at 21:15, I bring the meeting to a close.